Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. On the show today, Ducati have revealed who will be alongside Pecco Bagnaia next year. Johann Mir out, but Suzuki finding it difficult to find a replacement for this weekend's Misano Grand Prix, which we'll be previewing, and some more good news for Marc Marquez just in time for that crucial Misano test. The recording date is Monday, the 29th of August. My name is Harry Benjamin. Joining me as ever is Crash's MotoGP editor Pete McLaren and former Grand Prix rider and British champion Keith Huewen. And Keith, well, the big news breaking this week, we speculated, everybody's been speculating, Ducati were really tossing and turning between Jorge Martin and Enea Bastianini, but they have now finally chosen, and it is going to be Enea Bastianini who lines up in that factory Ducati ride. The right decision?
Yeah, I think so. There was speculation about Bagnaia having a hand in this. I think that the smile on Paolo Giabatti's bloody face after the pole position said it all to me. When the camera came back into the Ducati pit after he pumped that time in at Red Bull Ring, said it all, really. It was kind of justification for what he was probably already thinking. I think Bastianini had got the job done, really. It's a good choice. It's wonderful, isn't it? When it's spoilt for riches, really, when you've got that situation. And Bastianini, I think, has what I've mentioned before is headroom. I think it's about headroom. He's got that improvement still in him to make that next step, which he's going to have to make now that he's with a full factory team. I mean, just to clarify, a full factory team is not always, quite the wonderful. What am I looking for? The upgrade that you might want, because quite often you're on a motorbike that sometimes isn't quite working the way, because it's a development bike, because it's the cutting edge of that team. They've not got the data that they will have had for a bike that's a year old, and sometimes you need to fall back on data. So a new full factory machine sometimes doesn't quite handle in the way that you want. You can't quite get it to do what you need it to do. You can't. The technicians are still working their way around the data that they've got for a brand new bike. Whereas a 1 year old motorcycle, you have all that data already logged and in the background, so you can go to some kind of default. So sometimes the full factory machine is a bit of a poison chalice. We've seen it with Honda. Maybe a little bit with Yamaha at the moment, with the fact that Quattararo is the only one that can ride it. You get these anomalies that are in there. But I think Bastianini's got, like I say, the headroom talent-wise to take up that bit of slack.
Yeah, two great riders to choose from, didn't they? It wasn't an easy one, I'm sure, but I think, as Keith says, it's the sensible decision, if you like, isn't it? When you look at the results, 3 race wins. Before this year, no Ducati rider had won on a year-old bike, and Bastianini's won it 3 times, hasn't he? So, he's a proven winner. It's a big jump for him in the hierarchy, isn't it? Probably coming into this year, there was 8 Ducatis, and he would have been, 6th if 5 GP22s ahead of him, and now he's going up to basically, Ducati will say there's no number 1 or 2, but basically number 2 to Bagnaia, isn't it? So it's a big promotion for him there. If you're Jorge Martin, of course, you're kind of staying put, aren't you? You're sort of third in line, and he's remaining third in line. As Keith says, probably this decision was made before that last lap lunge in Austria. But you do have to wonder, was that a bit of an Andrea Iannone Argentina moment where, could that have had an influence? Probably the decision was already made, but perhaps, we've seen from the past with Iannone and Dovi that Ducati don't like riders that maybe put other Ducati riders at risk. Of course, Martin didn't take down Miller, but it gave Aleix Espargaro a couple of points, didn't it? And it gave Maverick another point for the, in terms of the team's championship for Aprilia. So it wasn't without consequences. But what I would say is that with Martin, you kind of think Ducati have won that only world championship with Casey Stoner. And if you were to pick a rider who was more similar to Stoner after his first year, I think you'd probably say Martin. And that's the only thing I would say, is that, he wasn't the sensible choice, was he? Casey Stoner in 2007, after that one rookie year, they took a gamble on him and it paid off fantastically. Livio Super spotted that talent if they could iron out those mistakes. And, Jorge Martin on his day is an incredibly fast rider. The genius here, I think, with Ducati is they signed up both of these guys, didn't they, before they knew which team they were going to ride in. Because otherwise, if you were Jorge Martin, you'd say, well, hang on, there's a Repsol Honda that hasn't been officially filled yet. If I'm not going to be in the factory team, I'll go and talk to them. But it's already done. They've both already signed up. They're on, they've both got factory deals, factory money, factory support, etc. It's done. So there's no question of him going anywhere else. And that's it now. He's going to be at Pramac presumably in the next 2 years of his contract.
Rider management, quite interestingly, because the rider management situation was blown apart by Suzuki's announcement as well. I mean, it's a situation where, when did they get those signatures on paper? But they will have been grateful for the fact they've got it on paper, with Ducati being in control of that. You've got two riders that are vying for position. It's very unusual for a rider manager to not be specific where the next step is. And they put that in the hands of the teams, as in Ducati, to make that move. I think from a rider perspective, Bastianini has now got a mentor in the brilliant Bagnaia. The situation there is, whereas, in Pramac, you've got, presumably Zarco will stay at Pramac. Johann Zarco, would he be the kind of mentor for a younger rider coming through? I would say that is not quite as positive from that point of view. The data that's coming across from the likes of Zarco will be completely different from the data that's coming across from Bagnaia. Now, I'm making an assumption here, but I'm pretty sure that Ducati will take the brand higher than the rider as usual, and they'll share any data that Bagnaia's got across the Pramac and so on and so forth, because that's the way it's done in the way of a brand. But it's still a situation where you're aiming at your teammate first and foremost, then the rest on the grid. Bagnaia is going to be the man to beat in the factory team. Zarco is going to be the man to beat in the Pramac team. What you do get at Pramac is less pressure, which sometimes can be a massive positive. It's a very friendly team. It's got a great atmosphere. It's like party. Seriously racing motorbikes, but there is a party element to it as well. So it's a great team. The Jack Millers of this world were made for Pramac. When he came through Pramac, it was just a fantastic atmosphere. So I think Pramac, a little bit less pressure from being in the independent team side of a factory, because they're all factory bikes at the end of the day. So there's minute differences where the factory probably has more advantage is that you get many more personnel direct from the factory that are concentrating on the factory bikes. And then if you're an independent team, there's another step down, if you like, of that kind of assistance. And I think that's just clear right the way through the grid. But I still think that Bagnaia, to have him to aim at, if you've got, like I say, that headroom, that little bit extra step that you're trying to make, as in Bastianini, to look across the garage and see Bagnaia there, who could easily still be world champion this year. We're not done yet with this world championship. It's going to be an interesting year in 2023. Can't wait.
What does something like this do for like the mindset of Jorge Martin? I'm sure he's a young guy as well, but this would have been a big blow for him, on a professional level, wouldn't it?
Revenge. It's you. I want to prove you all wrong. So there's a lot of positives to being, perhaps held back a little bit in the Pramac team. Is it held back? I don't know. I mean, it might not be held back. Let's wait and see. But it will be that if he needed any motivation, which he didn't, because basically all these guys are massively motivated. That'll be an extra percentage point that will, he'll be fierce off the line with this. He's got to control that. You can't make mistakes. You can't do an Andrea Iannone, as we keep using as an example at Ducati. You've got to kind of play the game, but it will be interesting to see how fired up he is for that.
You see it all the time, don't you, across motorsport, when seats or rides are confirmed, you suddenly, you the pressure's off almost, and a driver who hasn't been performing or a rider who hasn't been performing suddenly excels massively. But what this has done, Pete, as Keith alluded to, is Johann Zarco and Jorge Martin, now that is officially confirmed, isn't it? They are going to be remaining at Pramac.
Yeah, that's right. That came out sort of a quick announcement in the aftermath of this Friday evening sort of announcement, which is the same time as the Suzuki replacement announcement. It's that time period where you sort of, if you put out an announcement on a Friday evening, it's kind of one of those where you've got to make the announcement, but you're not really that keen on giving it too much publicity. And I'm guessing that with this, they want to get this all out of the way before the home race at Misano, don't they? That's really what this is about. There's been a lot of speculation for months, hasn't there? We've known this has been a head-to-head between these two guys. The pressure's been building. We saw that it was getting a little bit close in those early laps in Austria, wasn't it, between them? And so I think they'll be glad to have got this officially out of the way. The one thing Jorge Martin's saying put means there's stability there. He won't have to move teams. If Bastianini had gone there, that would mean that both of them would be in new teams next year. So it just gives a bit more stability, I guess, to the whole overall Ducati project. Their crew chiefs, of course, move with the riders at Ducati, so it's not just the riders moving. And as Keith says, the Bastianini Bagnaia partnership really going to be fascinating, isn't it? Because Bagnaia fast at the start of a race, Bastianini fast at the end of the races. So you've got these two guys, as Keith says, really quite thinkers, quite clever guys in how they use the bike and having something special in terms of performance, but at complete opposite ends of the race quite often. We saw Bagnaia sort of having to bite and then hold on in those last laps in Austria. And yet time and time again, we've seen Bastianini, he's really strong, isn't he? He just bides his time, uses his patience. He's got Andrea Dovizioso's ex-crew chief with him, Alberto Girabola. So again, maybe it's a bit of that knowledge that worked so well with Dovi, where he was great at just holding up the pace when he needed to and using the maximum of the tyres in the race. Now we're seeing that for Bastianini. So put those two guys together, and of course, if Bastianini can qualify better with that kind of end of race form, he's going to be pretty formidable next year.
You made me feel quite sad now you mentioned Dovi. 346th Grand Prix this will be this coming weekend at Misano. It's gonna. I don't think it's really hit anybody because it's been a pretty obvious build up to where we're going. I mean, Dovi stepping off the roundabout, early, is a good thing for him. There's no good finishing your career, way down the field and hurt. So stepping off about now, it's not like he isn't wealthy enough, but it's really, Dovi is a world champion that it never quite happened for. Like he was there or thereabouts. He was the only guy that could take it to Marc Marquez regularly. I don't think we can underestimate the level that Andrea Dovizioso was at. It's a shame it's sort of gone out with a bit of a whimper, but I'm going to miss Dovi being around the paddock. Very intelligent man about the way he goes about his business. Unassuming, all the things that certain motorcycle racers aren't. He's an asset that the paddock are going to miss.
I was going to say, do you think he leaves behind, despite obviously the poor end, which we've seen with multiple, obviously Valentino Rossi's end in MotoGP was not the ending he would have really liked either. But do you think he leaves a strong, lasting legacy? I mean, look, 15 wins, 62 podiums. He was pretty decent.
Well, I think the way that you've just summed it up by saying he was pretty decent is pretty much the understating of Dovi, because he was pretty decent. Was he a great rider? If you put him up against Marc Marquez and some of the classic, battles those two had, then yes, he was. If you look at the result sheet, then no, he wasn't. 346 Grand Prix, the ratio isn't as great as that. I think Dovi will slip into history without much fanfare, which I think is a shame because he was better than that. But he was up against some great riders. I mean, whenever you were as his teammate, he usually had the bettering of his teammates. Whoever he was, whatever team he was in, he usually was fractionally he had the advantage over them. And Dovi, he was. I think he's an old school racer, really, in his thinking. He reminds me of slightly a man out of time now, and literally is out of time now. It's come to an end. He's been there and done it across all classes, and he will leave the Grand Prix paddock with a huge amount of respect from riders and teams that he's worked with. But perhaps as far as history is concerned, he'll just slip into the grey area, if you like, of not quite a great. Sorry to say. That sounds terrible, doesn't it? But that's the way I feel.
I think, as he's saying, really, he'll be remembered more by the riders and as an inspiration for the riders, because he's someone whose best years came quite late in his Grand Prix career. Really, he was the Repsol Honda rider quite early. 1 year at a satellite team, straight into Repsol Honda, and then, as we've spoken about before, dropped down to Tech 12 for a year, and then came back and built that whole great period that Ducati had, let's say, with Gigi and all these other people involved. But I mean, he was there right the way through that. We've heard Aleix Espargaro talk many times about trying to do that same thing at Aprilia, of being inspired by Dovi, that you can stay with a project, not just try and keep jumping to what looks like the best bike at that moment, but actually try and build the best bike with the team in the way that Dovi did. And as Keith says, almost took him to the top. And the other thing that stands out for me is that I think of all the title battles I've seen sort of the last 20 years, they didn't fall out. The battles with Marc and Dovi, there was no nastiness, was there? You'd see them chatting on the way to the podium afterwards about, you were quicker than me there, I was better than you here. It didn't descend into that kind of the bitterness that we saw with really every other title battle over the last 2 decades and probably beyond.
Maybe that's what was missing.
Quite possibly. If you're watching this weekend, you will be watching this weekend. Just make sure, have a little look. He might not always be on the screen, but keep an eye on Dovi on that timing screen as well. In what will be his final race in MotoGP, Cal Crutchlow will step in on that bike and finish off the remainder of the season as well. But I mean, it's been a big week for Italy, hasn't it? But if we look much further away, Japan, and lots of news from the Suzuki camp in the form of who will replace Johann Mir, of course, after that huge high side in Austria. He's ruled out with this ankle injury, but also nightmare. Test and reserve rider Sylvain Gentoli also injured, so he can't do it. So there was loads of speculation. Apparently, Danilo Patrici turned it down, and Axel Bastianini, a World Superbike racer, also decided no. And now it's Kazuki Watanabe who is going to be racing that Suzuki, which is a reward, you think, Keith?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think that Suzuki, Suzuka. I mean, Suzuki finished. Watanabe was a third place man, I think, at Suzuka, which is a major thing, the endurance race for them. Somewhat ironically, seeing that Suzuki are pulling out of not just MotoGP, but obviously the Endurance World Championship as well. So there is nowhere to go. I mean, it's quite amusing, isn't there? There'd be so many people scrabbling to wildcard on that bike or to substitute on that bike at Misano normally. We're going to Misano, one of the homes of brilliant racing, and on a factory Suzuki, but nobody really wants to do it because there's no end product. There's no end game with this, is there? Suzuki are out of MotoGP. There's nothing really to be gained. I would think Gintoli's quite happy to have a busted wrist at the moment. To put yourself through all of that at a racetrack like Misano, test rider, he would have done them proud, and he would have loved to have ridden the bike, and he would have proved that he's a great rider, Gintoli. But there is no end product for it. There's nowhere to go with that ride. Other teams are pretty much solid at the moment. It's not like you're gonna enhance your status, should we say, in the paddock with Suzuki. So it is a problem. And Watanabe, 31 years old, he's going to have a bloody job to qualify. He's got to be within 105% around Misano. Hang on a second. I don't think he's ever been to Misano. I can't remember Watanabe being at Misano at any time. He's in the All Japan Championship, which he's okay. But he's going to have a struggle. It's not going to be an easy week for him, that's for sure. He'll bite his lip and get on with it. At 31 years old, he's pretty much been there, done that. So he'll be there or thereabouts, I suppose. But you've got to be within 105%. Otherwise, you fall into the discretion of the organisers to whether you actually get on the grid or not. And that ain't going to be easy. Misano, those guys are red hot. They're absolutely on. They're on fire at the moment in MotoGP. That 105% time is not an easy time to make around somewhere like Misano when you've got Quartararo and Bagnaia bashing the bits out of each other to put the fastest times in. And you need a grid position at Misano as well, which you can be fairly sure that there isn't going to be any quarter given or asked for. They're going to be at it.
Yeah, it was the same track, wasn't it? Misano, I think it was 2018, where they reduced, or the aftermath of it, that they reduced it to 105%, wasn't it? It used to be 107, and we had that whole thing, I think it was Christophe Ponson came in at Avintia, not having ridden the bike before, etc. And a few of the riders were a bit concerned. He was obviously, I think, about 4 or 5 seconds off the pace. I don't think he would have qualified under these new 105% rules.
I always felt sorry for Christophe Ponson, the amount of crap that he had to take. Do you know what I mean? He walked in there, he got given that ride, and he got a lot of shit when he didn't really deserve it as a rider. I remember that specifically. I mean, I don't know Christophe Ponson at all. I've never met the guy. But I remember feeling, hang on a minute, there's a boy here trying to do his job, and he's getting crap from all sides. And then they moved the 107 to 105%, which is good. I think that you should not become a backmarker. Backmarkers should be a thing of the past at this level. You shouldn't have people that are, being lapped. And I think that 105% is a fair percentage to put on the qualifiers.
They're kind of forced into it, aren't they? Because you've got this thing where it says they have to make every reasonable effort to field a replacement, don't they? So they have to find someone. But at the same time, as you say, Keith, there's so few riders that can ride these bikes quick. There's so few testing opportunities So you can't just say, oh, well, we'll give him half a day of a testing before the race weekend. You can't do that because of the testing rules. So you've got to find someone. They've got to be able to get within 105%. But you're not allowed to sort of help them out and give them any sort of training beforehand because that would count as testing. So yeah, it's. I mean, the whole idea that Watanabe can just go out and enjoy this weekend is pretty much off the table from the start because this is going to be on his mind, right? Well, enjoy it, but if you're too slow, you're going to be out of here by sort of Saturday midday, basically. And yeah.
Let me think about that for a moment. Cavone, the first time he arrived at Cavone, turn 11. That absolutely 150 mile an hour right-hander that's got a big wall to the left-hand side. The first time he arrives there on a MotoGP bike, that'll have his eyes wide.
Good luck, I think, is all we can say to Kazuki. Excuse me. Because it's going to be a steep learning curve for him, but we wish him all the best. But he does step in for Johann Mir in that Suzuki. What's also going to be really interesting, Pete, actually, is because we've got the Misano test as well, and Marc Marquez making a very big return to MotoGP in Austria, just getting involved in the meetings and becoming sort of the head rider consultant almost, I think. While he can't actually be on the bike, he's going to consult that thing as much as he can. But it seems like he's been given the green light recently from his doctors to continue ramping up his recovery ride, even though I think his granddad was telling him to stop riding. You've had enough, just leave it now. But he clearly wants to come back. Do we think we'll see him feature actually on a bike at Misano, or is that still way off?
It's still to be decided. Yeah, we know that Honda, Alberto Pucci's come out and said, look, even if he just does a handful of laps, that'll be worth it for us because at the moment they really need some direction for next year. And as you say, Harry, this is the big question. Will he be at this test? Because if he isn't, the next one is at Valencia in November. And that's it then. And that's it until next year. So Honda would love him to be at this test. I think that, we'll see him on another kind of bike first. So that will be, as Mark said, he's pretty sure that whenever he rides a bike, and as you say, he's been cleared to do heavier lifting and basically cleared to start training on motorbikes again. He thinks he'll know pretty soon what sort of condition his arm is in. It's not going to be, he's going to need days and days of trying bikes to know if he can ride again. So, yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of expectation on him to come back and just do some laps. I mean, the bone apparently is fully healed, is what this latest statement said. So there shouldn't be any additional risk there. Mark himself said, well, I'm not, there's no point waiting till I'm 100%. If I'm 70 or 80%, I may as well get on the bike. So this is the perfect chance to do it outside of a Grand Prix weekend as well.
It's a mark of Honda being in the position they're in at the moment, isn't it? That they've still got all their eggs in Marc Marquez's basket. Here's a guy that's been out for such a long time. He's had a major operation, another one on the same arm that may or may not be right when we get back to putting the major stress back on it. The fact of the matter is he's turning up at the moment in an executive position, giving ideas to Honda by looking in rather than being on the bike looking out, if you get my drift on that one. The fact is that he isn't riding that motorcycle. That motorcycle has evolved to where it is at the moment, and he's doing what all motorbike racers do, watching from the side of the track, watching on TV, trying to get a drift on the nuances of the way that motorcycle isn't working for everyone at the moment. I mean, Pol Espargaro was, as we'd expect from any Espargaro, was quite, should we say, forthcoming with a comment regarding where they're at as far as the Honda is concerned. I bet Honda love that. But the point being is that Marquez isn't going to be fit. It doesn't matter what anybody wishes or anybody wants. He is not going to be bike fit. He's done nothing on a motorbike. He is not going to be, 75% of the Marquez we know and love. He has got a long way to go before he comes back to the kind of performance, the kind of confidence, the kind of attitude that he would have on a motorbike. Like anybody that thinks that even the great Marc Marquez can step straight on a bike and be bike fit enough to go as quick as these guys are going at the moment is, completely wrong. This is going to take more time than people are giving him credit for, I think. I'm sure Mark knows that. His granddad certainly knows that. His granddad's comments were quite interesting, weren't they? That, he basically says, look, you're wealthy enough, you've done enough, you've been world champion enough, step off now. This is it. Mark has said, this is the last chance. This is the last go that he's going to have at making a comeback. We are still in the zone of not having a Marc Marquez in 2023, in my view. If this doesn't work out, there is nowhere else to go. There is nothing else that he can do. He is absolutely, this is the last roll of that dice to bring back Marc Marquez. If he's not fit enough, if the arm doesn't work in the way he wants, if he has another off that causes him, this is the other problem, push too hard too soon, his cat-like reactions for saving motorbikes have not been honed for months. You can't ride like he rides without the kind of input that he puts into the mileage that he puts in on a motorbike. All that's missing. You're risking the rate that the amount you're risking to try and push it as hard as we know he can push it without the track time is risking it even greater. It's a much higher risk level. So we've got a long way to go yet. Marc's got a long way to go yet. Everybody wants to see Marc Marquez back on track because he's a massive asset to our sport. He is something that everybody aims at.
Even just looking, we talked about it before, this whole idea of having an alien, a superstar in MotoGP, and Marc Marquez not being here the last few races, you could tell how desperate Dorna were to get him back on the screens, because even when in Austria there were bikes out on track, they were showing a lot of Marquez just wandering around in the pits, in the paddock, because they need his face on the screens, because it's crucial for MotoGP to have somebody like him as part of the championship.
Well, you've just opened a whole new can of worms there for the old podcast, haven't
Sorry.
you? Let's go there right now, Harry. I mean, like, the fact is that the sport, we're at Misano, 6 kilometres up the road is Tavuglia, where obviously the base of Valentino Rossi. We've been into this conversation. Mugello had nobody trackside comparison before. That was because the ticket prices were high. Was it because Valentino wasn't there as well? Maybe a little bit of that. We had Silverstone, 41,000 people at trackside. Is that because there was a World Superbike round recently? We got BSB coming up at Cadwell Park, as was this last weekend. Were people saving up to be somewhere else other than be at Silverstone, perhaps? There's so many things here at the moment. They're looking for that superstar. Valentino Rossi's gone out. The sport doesn't see it as that. I think a lot of people within the paddock, Valentino Rossi has left us. Well, I won't say so what, because it is quite a big deal. But so what? We move on. We go to our next superstar, whoever that might be. It might be Bastianini. These things move on. This is sport at the end of the day. These guys can't go on forever and ever and ever and ever. And it's the sport that's in a very healthy position. I hesitate to say that about 2022, because I think that we've just, at this moment in time, MotoGP is not quite as exciting as it has been over the last 7 or 8 years. I think this is the first slight dip we've had in that massively rising graph of brilliant years that we've had in MotoGP. I hesitate to say that because I hate to say it, because I think MotoGP is in such a good position with the rules, with the manufacturers up until Suzuki pulled out, obviously. The possibility of anybody else joining. Dorna have said that they will extend the grid if we get other manufacturers that are interested in coming in, so on and so forth. There's a lot of positives out there, but at the minute, we don't have that kind of sparkling rivalry. 2015, where Marquez and Valentino were absolutely banging heads on track and off, that brought in media from outside. We're like insulated motorcycle racing. Unfortunately, Grand Prix motorcycle racing, again, if you use a Silverstone example, how many column inches were there about the MotoGP British Grand Prix compared with the Formula One British Grand Prix? You hardly saw it anywhere. And that kind of rivalry thing, people go on about Lewis Hamilton because of his ethnicity, variants or whatever it might be. That is another one that blows up, and you get people, the unconscious bias that we all talk about nowadays. We were talking about it before we came on air. The BBC have just launched a big unconscious bias tome that you've got in broadcasting. You've got to be very careful about what you say. You've got to be and you know what? Despite the fact of my age, and my feelings towards this kind of box ticking stuff, I hate it. But there is unconscious bias, and as broadcasters, we should be aware of it and be controlling it to a certain extent. We should not be promoting unconscious bias. But then when it gets to the silly end of the market, where every single little thing is considered to be some kind of bias, a negative bias, that I don't agree with. Don't know how we got rambling in that direction, but anyway, we get.
You know what? I was thinking the exact same
We,
thing.
basically, what we get down to is column inches is what I'm going on about, the promotion of our sport. And the fact is all these elements are out there, but for some reason or another, we don't get that kind of interest in MotoGP that we really ought to be getting, considering the quality of the sport. And that will come down at the end of the day to the personalities in it. Who have we got in the sport that transcends our sport? We've got a great sport. It's been fantastic right up until maybe this year it's dulled off a little bit. Why are we not getting that? It's better than Formula One. I'm sorry. It's better than Formula One when it comes to the actual gladiatorial duels on track. There is no doubt in my mind. Anybody watch? How can Spa be boring? How can Spa be so boring? I watched that Formula One race in between the bits on BSB at the weekend. Honestly, you would need to slap yourself every 10 minutes just to stay awake. And yet, that will have got all the big headlines, all the big, press, if you like, compared with MotoGP, which, if we'd had MotoGP at Spa, it would have been sparkling. It would have been something really spectacular on track. And that's across three classes.
Yeah, I actually agree with you. I haven't seen the full Grand Prix. Shock, not yet. I've seen a little bit of it, but
try and stay awake if you can, Harry. And you're a big car man. I mean, it is difficult. And when you've got, we talk about sometimes Ducati making slight mistakes here and there, but Ferrari, for some strange reason, if they can make a cock up, I'm sure they've got a list of cock ups and they tick them off when they make it every time. It's. I can see Pete looking bemused because I'm sure he didn't watch the bloody Formula One. Don't blame.
What? I tell you what though. I didn't watch it because I was at Carfest, Chris Evans Carfest this weekend. Sorry, there were no bikes there. But I did bump into a couple of young guys who ran over to me screaming my name, and they said, "Oh, we love the podcast. We love Pete. We love Keith. We love the MotoGP. We're listening for a year. So thank you very much to you two guys who came over. So we've got two listeners. We've got
we got three. My mum.
Oh, and Keith's mum. Fair play. So that's three. Okay, so let us know if there's any more of you. Just let us know so we can just carry on doing it. That'd be great. But I wanted to get on to talking a bit more about Misano. That's where it's all kind of stemmed from. And the Rossi effect, I wonder, will it be in reverse because, he's not there now. But talk us through the track, Keith. Quarters to watch out for. What do you need for a good flow around Misano? We should get an exciting race, hopefully, even in this slight dip of MotoGP.
I think you have to start with Misano as a place, where it is on the Rimini coast. It's a little bit dated now, Misano and Rimini in general. I remember when I first went to Misano, obviously the track went the other way round back in the day. But the fact is that it's in a lovely area, even though it's a little bit dated. It's a bit like the Isle of Man. You've got these wonderful Victorian facades all the way around the seafront and all the rest of it, but they're all a bit older and a bit flakier paint and so on and so forth. And kind of the region of Rimini is a bit that way nowadays. The track itself is not the best track. So you've got quite a lot of track in quite a small area. But it's got such a lot of history. You go down, the Giro Cato Drive or whatever it might be. There's names of different people. You've got a big monument in the middle of one of the roundabouts, Marco Simoncelli. Well, it is the Marco Simoncelli track, isn't it now, as named. But there's a lot of history that goes on there, and obviously the hordes, the raiding hordes of yellow, as it used to be, that used to walk the 6 kilometers in from Tavulia, having revved themselves up out of control in Rossi's village down the road. And it's just one of those places that's got the vibe, I think is a phrase that I may use even at my age. It's got that kind of feeling about it that you talk about, I'm going to Misano. It's a big deal for a motorcycle racer. It's a big deal for a motorcycle fan to be there. Generally, the place is absolutely rammed full. There isn't another place. They're good tunnelers. They'd make great escape artists or something like that. The Great Escape, because they can tunnel under any fence or climb over any fence. I'm sure that the official figures are always about 10,000 short because of the ones that got in there for free. one way or another. The Italians are quite spectacular when it comes to working their ways into racetracks. But even when you drive down that first little bit of road and you turn into the first roundabout where the first set of security is, you're going, I'm at Misano, and it's got that feel about it. And the paddock's full of people that you shouldn't be full of. And the fans are looking forward to something fantastic. And you've got, there are some corners at Misano that just take your breath away as a rider. In the past, you used to come out and you've got like 3 corners that increase in speed. You're gassing it up, and everything's spinning. And Cavone, which is now turn 11, Cavone, you're coming the other way around. But when it was a fast left-hander and there was this 10-meter solid concrete wall with fans on top of it to your right-hand side at 140 mile an hour as you went through the apex, it used to be fairly scary sideways on. Now you're coming the other way because it's a little bit safer, going the kind of clockwise way around the track. And Cavone, now you approach it and you are really, really motoring. You just about get through it on a Moto 2 bike, just with a sort of roll on the limiter, if you like. Moto 3 is flat through there, but MotoGP really gets your attention, which is why I mentioned Kazuki Watanabe earlier on. That turn 11. It'll be a while before he goes through that anything like the speed he should be. Then you've got, because it's now decreasing speeds through the next 2 or 3 corners. So you go through that as fast as you can, then you're a little bit slower in the next one, a little bit slower in the next one before you get to the hairpin where all the action is and everybody's bumping and barging and trying to push it up the inside. It's going to be, I think that the surface as well at Misano is something that has been controversial over the years. It depends on the racetrack surface, how it's going to be this year compared with previous years. You can never be quite sure with Misano whether you're going to have a grippy track or not so grippy. Is it going to have a few ripples here and there? We'll wait and find out when we get to FP1. But it is one, as is most of the MotoGP tracks, one for the bucket list. You've got to be, the whole ice cream and restaurants down the Rimini coast, sit by the sea, Ooh. Looking out into the coast and riding or driving the short distance to the racetrack and being sucked into that Italian atmosphere. What's not to like about being in Italy anyway? Food is brilliant. Atmosphere is outstanding. The Italians are all mad, particularly when it comes to racing. We're going to have a spectacular weekend.
Oh, you've painted a perfect picture there, Keith, of what to expect. Pete, what are you watching out for this weekend? Anything in particular?
Well, it's Ducati's home race, of course, as well as being all the Italians' home race. So, they should be strong here. They test here a lot. Aprilia as well, of course, also, we should say. And so there's going to be a bit of a rivalry there, isn't there? That usually Ducati has obviously been the favourite at this track, but this year with Aprilia, could they steal the home glory? That would certainly be a big coup for them if they could beat Ducati. But they're going to have a job on their hands. This is a track where we've seen Bagnaia and the Ducatis going well in the past. So, as Keith summed it, atmosphere, that's the thing that just springs to mind with Misano. If you just looked at the track on paper, it's flat and as Keith says, it's crammed into quite a small space, but it's the atmosphere that makes it special. And certainly on race day morning, when there's going to always, well, certainly in the Rossi years, there was always going to be this huge sellout crowd, but still standing there and looking out at all of these fans, because it's flat, you are sort of down on that sort of level. It's a bit like at Assen when you look out at the banks of people as well. Always is something spectacular to see. And so, we cross our fingers that after what we saw at Mugello, that this will be another event with a lot of fans at it, not the kind of low turnout that we saw last time. So there'll be a lot of people, I think, keeping their fingers crossed. Of course, we've had the COVID restrictions in previous years that have kept all of the fans away. So, let's hope that they return in the numbers that they have done in the past.
Absolutely. Right, it's that time, guys. I hope you have prepared diligently. Prediction time for this weekend, and it is tight in our leaderboard. And in fact, it's me that has lost out after last week because Keith and Pete tied with 11 points in the lead, but I'm only 1 point behind in 10th with 10, so it's still to play for. Keith, you look like you're working hard, trying to scrabble together some ideas. What have we got there? What does that say?
Oh, weather.
Oh, is it going to rain?
Thunderstorms.
Oh, well, to be fair, didn't it said it would, Austria, I know, is up in the mountains, so it can either all come or not come. But it did say it was going to rain a lot over the weekend, but it didn't really come for the race.
Well, I thought I'd just check on it, just because you were asking for predictions again, which is always a pain,
Yeah.
and seeing that I'm lagging a bit nowadays, my sporting bets are causing me a problem.
Good thing there's no money involved in these ones.
If there was, I'd be 5 points ahead of you.
True.
I'd actually think about it a little bit harder than perhaps I do.
Come on then, enough stalling.
Well, based on the weather, I'm going to go Quartararo Miller Bagnaia.
Okay, couple of Ducatis, but the Yamaha to win out. Pete?
I'm also going Quartararo for the win. I think that it's a big weekend for him against the Ducatis, and I think he really wants to, take some points off them. Just stop this momentum that Bagnaia's got. Bagnaia, we know, goes very fast there. So yeah, I'll put Bagnaia second. I hope it'll be a great battle between them that we haven't really seen yet, have we? One or the other has always sort of got in front and stayed there. And then for me, I mean, last time I went with Martin because Austria was a bit of a Martin track. This weekend, I think it's a Bastianini track. I mean, he's been on the podium. I think he had his first win there, etc., etc., etc. So I'm going, Bastianini for third. But honestly, if he can qualify for what he did last year, was it third from 16th on the grid or something? I mean, if he can qualify in the top 10, he might even win it.
I'll tell you what.
And what a way that would be to sort of celebrate the new contract.
That's a great shout because Bastianini was my man in the top three until I looked at the weather, and I replaced him. Replaced him with Miller because I think Bastianini could win it.
Well, come on then, finish off. So who's second though for you, Pete?
Oh, sorry, Bagnaia.
Oh,
Bagnaia,
and then Bastianini. Okay.
Yeah. But as Keith says, Bastianini could win it. I think that as well.
Well, it just so happens that I put Bastianini in first, obviously.
Oh.
What you mean just then?
Yeah.
So hang on. Who did you say was also good? You know what? I actually was going to put Bagnaia first, so I'm going to stick with Bagnaia. I'm thinking an all Ducati podium. I'm just not entirely sure of the order. And I actually thought maybe Martin might sneak on because he's fired up after not getting the ride.
That's
so
good thinking. Good thinking.
I'm gonna stick with my guns. I'm actually gonna go Bagnaia, and then I'm gonna go Miller, and then I'm gonna go Jorge Martin because I think he'll be fired up and not happy at the fact that he's lost out to Bastianini.
That is a proper sporting bet, Harry. Full respect here. Full respect.
Absolutely. Come on, Jorge. Right, well, there's only a few days left until we go racing once more in Misano. I think that just about does it from us lot. We'll shut up for the time being. Make sure you're tuned in, of course, to Crash.net for all the latest news and analysis across the week. And then we shall be back with you next week to look back at all things Misano. Get your questions in. Leave them in the comments section or tweet, Instagram, Facebook. Just search Crash MotoGP. I actually did see a question for me. Someone asked me if I ride. I don't. But Keith might teach me one day. But in the meantime, until that happens, leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts as well. And we'll see you right back here next week. Bye-bye.